Okay, welcome everybody. My name's Kevin Kerrigan. I'm the Dean of the Law School here at Northumbria University. And this is the last of this year's Eldon lecture series. And it does seem only a short time ago that I was announcing the first one and looking forward to this series. And now we're at the end. I don't know if anyone in this room has been to all of them. I can't even claim to have done that, but I think probably one or two. Claire certainly has, and Devril. It's been a really interesting, entertaining, sometimes inspiring, sometimes controversial, and always enlightening series of lectures. And I'm really happy to say that the last one is, I hope, going to be no different to what I've just described. David Edmonds is going to give the last in this year's Eldon lecture series. And David Edmonds is the chairman of the Legal Services Board. The board itself was created by the Legal Services Act in 2007. Its overriding mandate is to ensure that regulation in the legal services sector is carried out in the public interest. And I think that's as opposed to lawyers' interest in brackets there, in the interest of consumers and making sure that consumers are placed at the heart of the system. David was appointed as the inaugural chairman of the Legal Services Board on the 1st of May in 2008, and that was renewed on the 1st of May last year, and his period of office, I think, is set to run until April 2014. Following a career in the senior civil service and as chief executive of the Housing Corporation, David spent 7 years as a managing director within the NatWest Group. His regulatory experience includes 5 years as Director General of Telecommunications and 2 years as founding member of the Board of Ofcom. He was chair of the Board of NHS Direct from 2003 to 2008, and he was a commissioner at the Legal Services Commission for 4 years. David is also chairman of NHS Shared Business Services Limited, the non-executive director of several PLCs, and the Olympic Park Legacy Company. Tonight, David is going to talk about diversity in the legal workforce, and you can see the title of his talk, A Step Change for a More Diverse Legal Workforce. I'm delighted to welcome David Edmonds.
I'm not sure whether there's going to be a lecture in the way that perhaps you expect lectures to be. I think I'd just talk a little bit and perhaps we can have a conversation and some questions. Particularly as the first time that I've seen the title of the lecture as when I came in the room tonight and saw it up there. The Legal Services Board, perhaps it's just worth a second or two, because those of you who teach law, those of you who are studying law, will probably have been aware that in the, last 10, 15 years before we were created, there was a huge degree of dissatisfaction with the way in which the legal sector self-regulated. If the legal profession had actually organised its affairs better, we wouldn't have needed to have existed. As my children used to say, as my grandchildren now say, I didn't ask to be born. But we didn't ask to be born, but Parliament felt that we were needed because something had to be done about the way in which solicitors were regulating themselves. Too often it was perceived in their own interests, without a proper complaints machinery, with no ombudsman service, the way in which the bar pursued its own self-interest. It was perceived as against the interests of the community, as against the interests of society at large. So we were set up with an overarching mandate to look at the way in which the Solicitor Regulatory Authority runs its affairs. We're actually having a quite interesting debate with them about quality, and indeed with the Bar Standards Board about quality. It's there in the founding legislation. The founding legislation is really very interesting because it actually gives us some statutory duties, some really rather good duties about promoting, defending access to justice, about promoting, defending the rule of law, about breaking down barriers to competition, about promoting a legal profession that is diverse. These are statutory duties that are placed upon us. They're also placed upon the primary regulators, and I want to come back to the diversity thing in a moment or two. But what it has meant in the first 4 years has been us finding a role that means that we can impact on the economic side of the marketplace, if you like. So a huge amount of our work, and last time I was here, wasn't actually in this lecture theatre, but I was here, I was talking about alternative business structures and their introduction and what would happen. Well, they're now here. The Solicitors Regulatory Authority has got scores of applications from bodies who want to become an alternative business structure, who want to have the opportunity of bringing new capital into their businesses, who want to have the opportunity of using staff in a different kind of way. We have the first mergers for, if you like, strong economic reasons in order to offer this range of services moving into the next 10, 15 years. We've got foreign investment coming in, a large American, an Australian firm buying a UK firm. A whole range of business models are emerging as a result of our work over those 3 years. We were talking earlier about alternative business structures and what that actually meant, and I'm told that the guy from the Law Society, when he was here talking, said, well, actually, alternative business structures in the next 3 or 4 years will be the business structures, and what we've got now will be something that was in the past. I wish the Law Society had taken that view when they were fighting me every inch of the way as we were trying to introduce alternative business structures, but that's an issue that we've now passed and we've now moved on to. So, firstly, what we spent 4 years doing is getting that framework for alternative business structures out, up, running. And I think there will be fundamental shifts in the way in which law is delivered for a large part of the community who have recourse to law over the next few years. I think the second major achievement that we have to our name is the creation of the Office for Legal Complaints. There is now a fully fledged, functioning, operating ombudsman service. It has almost totally nullified the criticisms that existed before, that there was nowhere to make a complaint to, that complaints were dealt with in an unsatisfactory way. And a very good service, I think, is now being provided to people who do have a problem with the way in which their legal advice has been given, whether it's by a barrister or whether it's by a solicitor. So that is up, running, and I think really operating rather well. The third major area of concentration over those 4 years has been getting right the governance of regulation as distinct from the politics of representation. The Law Society had an iron grip, I would argue, for many years over the SRA and the way in which it did things, and the confusion of regulatory work with representative work meant, I think, that regulation was always a second-class citizen. And I think the same was true of the Bar Standards Board and the Bar Council. I won't go into all the detail because it's boring, but I think over the last 2 years we have finally wrenched apart the representative side from the regulatory side. There are now regulatory bodies who are genuinely independent of the Bar Council and of the Law Society. And I think that they are beginning to look very hard at the way in which their own quality of delivery can be enhanced over the 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead. So what I think in 4 years my board has tried to do is to deliver a series of objectives that were set for us in the original legislation. And clearly, I'm being effective, because only this week the Bar Council chairman said of my plans for the next year, those plans disclose a level of ambition to be involved in areas of activity that we consider are properly the province of the approved regulators and fall outside the terms of reference of the LSP altogether. He went on to say, our intention to help stimulate the market for legal services, we don't have a remit to do that. Well, the whole Act was about that. He went on to say that legal services were not a market that should function like others. It was undesirable and out of line with statutory objectives that we should pursue our work in that kind of area, and that we're misunderstanding our role as an oversight regulator. I don't think we're misunderstanding our role as an oversight regulator at all. I'm actually quite proud of much of the work we've done as an oversight regulator. I think you heard a little bit about my own career, which you may say, well, flips from A to B to C to D or to whatever. I profoundly believe in change, even at my quite advanced age. I don't think that you can drive policy forward. I don't think you can drive an economic industry forward. I don't think you can drive a business forward unless you're constantly looking at change and opportunity. And my hope is that the Legal Services Act and the part that we've played in that has enabled that change to be brought about more easily. And I think it's got to be brought about because of the various economic and financial pressures that are faced by the profession in the environment of 2012. It has been a struggle, often been a struggle. I think the innate conservatism of the legal profession doesn't need documenting, but I've now heard, I had it only the other week, now had it said to me four times in my career as chair that we've done it like this for 800 years, Mr. Edmonds, why should we change now? Now, that's a perfectly fair remark to make. I would, and I do respond, well, we may have done it like that for 800 years, but surely it's time to look whether we should do it differently. And in a way, that underpins the whole question of legal training, legal education, the major review that's going on at the moment. That review, to a very large degree, was stimulated by the Legal Services Board. The number of senior people in the sector, from judges through academics, through solicitors in the big city, who came along and said, well, actually, what we're getting isn't quite what we want. Something's wrong. Someone should have a look at it. And so we did. We encouraged the creation of the review team that is currently, I hope, going to spend the next year producing some proposals for the future. Now, what those proposals are, I have no idea. But what I do know, it was time to turn over what happens at the moment and to have a look at whether there are better and different ways of producing education and training. Which takes me right into the area of diversity, because the longer I've been chairman of this board, the more I've become convinced that there are some serious issues about the diversity within the sector and about the commitment of the sector to change, to make things better. As we see new entrants coming into the marketplace, as we see lawyers working in new types of practice, as we see new professional providers coming into that marketplace, there is a fundamental principle for them and for their regulators, which is the need for the people coming into the profession, for the profession itself, to have a commitment to strong and positive ambition to the promotion of diversity. And the makeup of the legal workforce, I think, is really, really very interesting, because I started to get some data together. I won't read out too many numbers, but you can perhaps just listen to these and draw some conclusions of your own. Let's take gender composition for a start. This is data taken from the 2011 Bar Barometer. In 2005-06, the gender composition of the bar was 67% male, 33% female. 2009-10, it's 66% male and 34% female. That's quite interesting, because at the BPTC stage was 51% male and 49% female in 2004. It's 48% male and 52% female in 2008-09. Pupillage, 2004-5, 50% male, 45% female, there's some missing data. 2008-9, 55% male and 41% female. Change in balance, the percentage of men had increased by 5% and women decreased by the same amount, during a period when everybody was allegedly working very hard to create a more diverse bar. QCs, 2005-6, 92% male, 8% female. 2009-10, 89% males and 11% female. These are numbers which you can draw your own conclusions from, and I may be drawing the wrong conclusions from them, but I would argue that the pace of change which we see, not just in that part of the legal service profession, but also in the world of solicitors, is almost glacially slow. That the commitment to creating a more diverse, both in terms of gender and certainly in terms of ethnicity and in terms of social, economic backgrounds, has been much, much too slow. I'd argue that there are some localised initiatives that have had some success, but that we don't have sector-wide and systemic change. What I am arguing, what we are going to be arguing over the next year or so, is that we need to try and get into some of these issues in a way that means that we actually make much more significant change over a more a shorter period than evidence suggests in the past has been possible. And we think it's important. We think social mobility is important. These are all objectives that are actually set in the legislation for my board. So I make no excuse about getting into those areas. I think that for legal businesses, we need to widen the pool to keep the labour market flexible. We need legal businesses who actually widen their search to get the brightest and best from much more diverse backgrounds than is the case now. I think there's a major public interest value. I think the people who deliver legal services have a central part to play in protecting access to justice. I think it is extremely important that lawyers do reflect, perhaps much more accurately than they do at the moment, the communities from which their clients are drawn. I think the way in which people move through the legal sector into the judiciary again goes down a particular route, which at each stage seems to consolidate what was there at the stage before. And I think the whole question of social mobility as we go through the legal providers of legal services really needs a degree of analysis that until now has not been present. It's a very homogenous social group which actually appears to end up in the world of the top law firms and of the top chambers. Now, you can argue that that is an essential feature of the education system. You can argue that is because the brightest and the best go into those areas. It doesn't seem to me, looking at this from my perspective as the overarching regulator, that it can actually be justified in terms of the underlying qualities and strengths of the community that actually exists out there. So, we want this review into education and training to look very hard at diversity as well as at the other issues that they are looking at. The more pluralist legal services market that we are moving into will demand different kinds of people. I think there's much that we can learn from other services, from other sectors, and I want to see much more innovation and challenge to some of the old orthodoxies. I think that you know better than I about the old paradigm of the 3-year academic degree followed by a single-year practical course shouldn't squeeze out emerging alternatives. I think we look at the way in which legal executives are now creating a more diverse type of practitioner through the in-job training approach is also there as a very interesting example to follow. I think, and again, it is different here because you do things differently. In this country generally, unlike in the US, there is a relative isolation between education and practice. And I've just been upstairs looking at some of this, the training stage, we think, does need to do far more to reflect the real pressures of the legal workplace. The innovative thinking that is going on here is actually, I think, extraordinarily interesting. And this experience of working in a simulated law firm environment must be one important, or could be an important evolution as we look to the future. So I think reflecting the real demands of private practice, as well as giving students the chance to interact with each other, as they would do in a law firm, is a real example of educational innovation. And I think that the way in which Paul Mahag is part of the team on the National Review of Education and Training does give us hope that some of these experiences and thought will be brought into the Education and Training Review. So I see regulators with a real role to play in facilitating rather than getting in the way of innovation and diverse course design. I do believe that providers should be free to structure and deliver programmes in a way that directly addresses employer and student demand. And I think changes in the market make this inevitable, and we need diverse routes into the profession to reflect that more diverse market. Traditional routes will remain, but I think only as one option. So the hope of the Legal Services Board is that a redesigning of the education and training framework will help with the broadening of the profile of the workforce. It's a kind of fundamental sector-wide change we need to see if we're to widen the base of lawyers. So I want the regulators to step back and allow this to happen. They mustn't fight change, but they need to be proactive too. One of the things we're doing, and hopefully to encourage this systemic change, is the publication of new regulatory requirements for law firms and chambers. We're requiring those entities to conduct diversity surveys across their entire workforce. We're asking them to publish the results. Every individual in the legal workforce is going to answer questions about age, gender, disability, ethnic group, religion, belief, so on, caring responsibilities. And at the end of 2012, the first round of this published summary data will be made available at entity level. So as a board, we are actually getting into the detail of what's happening on the ground in the way in which it hasn't happened before, in the belief that transparency and publication will act as a major spur for people to behave, hopefully, in different kind of ways. We're actually picking up the characteristics protected under the Equality Act of 2010. So, firms will also have to publish data on social economic factors, whether individuals attended state or fee-paying school, whether they're the first in their family to go to university. The whole issue of social mobility that this government is allegedly committed to, as was the last government allegedly committed to, is at the heart of much of that work. So what I want to see is real transparency, tracking the impact of initiatives and putting pressures on firms to recruit more widely. While approved regulators will need to gather together aggregate data to provide the overall national picture, individual firms, individual chambers, individual companies have actually got to respond in very specific ways. And I think that's absolutely right. The decisions that affect the makeup of any workforce are in reality made by senior managers and owners. And I want to put, in a way, the spotlight on them to account for the diversity of their firm. I want to go back to that run of numbers, some of which I quoted at the start of these remarks, and hopefully be able to say in 2, 3, 4 years' time that the pace of change has actually quickened as a result of these pressures. I see that sitting on the board of several PLCs where government has been very clear. They want more women on boards. And the fact that you see a table showing that your board has got no women on it is a very major factor in making you think about, is what we're doing right? Should we go on acting as we have done? And in a way, all the work that we are now doing on diversity, all the work that we are doing to ensure that this overall data can be tracked, I hope will inform not specific interventions later on, but I hope will lead to a change in behaviours that will drive forward a much more effective approach within our sector towards the promotion of diversity. Not gender diversity, but diversity in terms of black and minority ethnic groups. I've got lots of data on that as well, and social mobility too. I don't think this is political correctness gone mad, and I don't think it is the Legal Services Board outstretching what it's supposed to be doing. I believe it's absolutely consistent with the legislation, and it's absolutely consistent with what I believe is good public policy. What I'm proposing is straightforward. I'm not trying to control firms and chambers. I'm not trying to impose a vision of a perfect firm, but I am trying to put pressure on them to start identifying and tackling the barriers facing particular groups. If the figures indicate sprawling gaps, then they need to do more to encourage applicants to make appointments from a wider range of backgrounds. So, in the legal services sector, my view is that requiring transparency is a light touch way of recognising that we need to modernise and improve. And I don't think either it's an onerous or burdensome challenge that I'm throwing out here. It's an annual survey published by the firm past the approved regulator. Nor are we asking for sensitive data that might be an intrusion of privacy. These are all the arguments that have been thrown back at me that we shouldn't do that. No one has to answer the questions. Everyone can say they have a right not to say. But what it is about is identifying where people with particular characteristics face barriers so that targeted action can be taken. Nor do I think that publication at firm level will put people off responding. There's a whole series of arguments that are used about diversity and the baseline for data in diversity that get thrown at one. I do not believe that attitudes, that those arguments are sustainable, and I do believe that attitudes will change over time. I'm aiming for a culture where there is diversity, where individuals are comfortable with providing data, and where we actually see real change on the ground. So, the great fascination in many ways of my job is that on the one hand, we can work through these very hard economic issues like alternative business structures. We can work through, and have worked through, the whole issue of independent and higher quality regulation. We can work through issues to do with the proper dealing of complaints about law firms. We can work through a fascinating topic we have at the moment, quality assurance for advocates, where we're working very hard to try and get in place a scheme which for the first time will give some assessment of the quality of advocates working in the criminal courts, where for years and years and years and years people have said, well, they're not very good, or some of them aren't very good, or that barrister or that solicitor was absolutely hopeless. And there's been no mechanism whatsoever for assessing, either by the judge or by any other route, those qualities. It's taken us about 2 years to get to a point whereby I hope in the next week or so we'll announce that such a scheme will be getting off the ground, hopefully by the end of this year, and with the first registrations into it, possibly in the summertime. It's been a total struggle. Everything we've done has been a struggle, and that is another joy of the job, which is why taking on the whole issue of diversity, the promotion of transparency and diversity, because we believe it's right, is so exciting. And I don't want to micromanage, and we don't micromanage, and we don't expect the regulators to either. But I want to be quite clear. I think that there is a huge pressure now on individual organisations within the legal services sector to do the base work on diversity, to produce action plans that lead to a much more effective workforce beginning to emerge, and really quite quickly. And it can be quite quick. If I go back to my point about women board members on FTSE companies, the pace of change is really quite dramatic. A 30% increase in the proportion of women on boards within a year. So you can get a significant shift. If it can happen in Britain's boardrooms, which are pretty darn conservative, it ought to be able to happen in the legal services sector as well. So I believe that we have launched some work here that will be fundamentally important in a relatively, I hope in a relatively short period, to bring about that phrase step change. I think there's another really quite interesting issue in terms of the law. There is a substantial gender pay gap, and I think it's worse, the evidence I have, in the legal services market than it is in the economy as a whole. The Law Society Salary Survey of a couple of years ago, it's the latest one I can find, found that the median gender pay gap in yearly earnings was 28.9%, compared to a national gender pay gap of 17%. Now, all I'm saying is that if you've got data like that, you've got to try and get underneath it, work out why it's there, work out if there are rational reasons for it, because on the face of it, there aren't. We believe that there has to be a serious and systemic effort to improve the policies within the marketplace on diversity in all its forms, and I would include in that social mobility too. I don't see it as an optional corporate social responsibility style add-on. It's about a much more fundamental approach to what is right, what should be absolutely implicit in the policies of individual firms, whether they're the huge law firms in the city or whether they're barristers' chambers. I think that enhancing working in that area in the way that we are is an extraordinarily important part of what we do. It's one part of what we do, but it's part of the policies that we are beginning to work up and work through that we profoundly believe in. So I've concentrated more perhaps on diversity tonight than on many of the other issues I deal with, because I've been thinking quite hard about how we take this forward. I hope you can see from all that I've said that this is something, A, that we should be doing, B, that we've actually got a plan for doing it, and I hope all of you will agree it's the right thing to do. Thank you very much.